Welcome this morning, or this afternoon now on Wednesday, to coffee time with Pastor Kristina and Pastor Gary. We are in the fellowship hall here at Glen Cary, and you can see the quilts behind us made by the ladies in our church who do quilting. And just to make a connection here for all of us, it'll be in 2 weeks, actually, 2.5 weeks, Sunday morning, June 14th. We're going to be outside in worship and recognizing our seniors. And on that Sunday in our parking lot, in our outdoor worship, we will wrap our seniors in quilts that our quilters have made as a way of launching them into the next stage of their life. Next Sunday, June 7th. Will be our first outdoor worship, and Pastor Kristina is preaching. She's going to be on top of the world, on top of the roof.
I thought it was a joke, but it's not a joke.
No, it's perfect height. It's 15 feet up there, and you can see the entire parking lot. And you'll feel like the Beatles. You know that? Have you ever seen that clip where the Beatles perform a song on top of a roof? And U2 does it once, so you're going to be a rock star.
I've never seen that.
Then the June 21st, let you know, outdoor worship. We're doing a classic car Sunday, so bring your fancy cars, like your car. Do you still have that Honda van, that red one?
No.
Oh my gosh, make sure my wife doesn't watch this video. No.
If it helps, I gave it to someone in need.
It does help. So Pentecost is this coming Sunday. And so we're going to deal with that text from Acts chapter 2 today. Talk about what does it mean to be the church in the world today. And then Sunday's worship will be absolutely fabulous. It'll be our last edited. It's John's last Sunday. Oh.
Bye, John.
Bye, John. Yeah, John is going out to camp. John's working for a Lutheran Bible camp this summer. No kids. They're going to put artificial kids in the cabins, and they won't misbehave. It'll be an easy summer. Let's go swimming. Nope. Then you'll carry the mannequins down to the water.
Oh, jeez.
Let's read Acts chapter 2 before we get too silly.
All right. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly a sound came from heaven like the rush of a mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire, distributed and resting on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And at this sound the multitude came together, and they were bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in his own language. And they were amazed and wondered, saying, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear, each of us in our own language?" And all were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others, mocking, said, "They are filled with new wine." But Peter, standing with the 11, lifted up his voice and addressed them, "Men of Judea, and all who dwell in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and give ear to my words. For these men are not drunk, as you suppose, since it is only the 3rd hour of the day. But this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. And in the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and old men shall dream dreams. And on my men servants and my maid servants in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show wonders in the heaven above, and signs on the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the day of the Lord comes, the great and manifest day. And it shall be, whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved."
That's the Pentecost story. And for those of you who don't know, Pentecost actually is a Jewish festival. It's called the Festival of Weeks. We're not going to share a lot about that, but it's an interesting history within the Jewish faith. Pentecost, we tend to see nothing as but the birth of the church. And it is that in Acts but a Jewish history with its own festival. I encourage you sometime to go back and read through that and understand that own history that leads into this. The church is an amazing place because I think nearly everybody that I know in this culture, from my childhood to have some perception of what church is. You either went to it as a child and were raised in it, or you saw it from a distance. Maybe you reached your teen years and a friend brought you to a church event, a lock-in or some event that was going on. And all of these people, everybody that mostly I know, have some perception of what the church is. And the reason we have Pentecost Sunday and read this text is we're trying to go back and discover, what does that Spirit mean for us? What does it do to us? Is the church an institution? Is it a thought? Is it a spirit? Is it a way of viewing the world? Is it a community? Well, it's all of that. But after you read this text, what comes to you about what you're hearing that, which is words for us today as the church? What do you hear, Kristina?
Well, one of the themes of this Sunday that we will hear is 1 Corinthians 12, which is about that we are one body as the church with many different members. And you hear that also in this story when all of a sudden the gospel is being proclaimed in a multitude of languages. It just continues that as the church today, we are not just the local church here in Ham Lake. We are a global church. That people from all over the world, from many different countries, of all different colors and backgrounds, we all belong to one another and we all belong to Christ. And I think that given everything going on in the world today, we need to be reminded of this, that all the things that separate us, racism and sexism and nationalism, all these things that keep us divided, they are not of God. And the Spirit brings us all together and makes us one.
One of the things that's amazing that we know is our world is getting smaller. The internet and everything else brings what previously was almost unknown into, you can go on YouTube and watch any aspect of our world and our culture that just a previous generation didn't have such a confrontation with different cultures and languages. I find what's so interesting in this text, it's as though the truth of this from 2,000 years ago and even before that, the truth of it is an awareness that we're going to have to deal with a global world. Mm-hmm. And the Acts story does that. It's not about different races. It's about seeing all God's children got a place in the choir. God's got the whole world in his hands. I think the church that I was raised with tended to want to be so white European. And we saw our job as missionaries. I remember in my church we would have missionary Sunday and find out about somebody who was over in other parts of the world trying to make those people more exactly like us. And our churches have had to go through in this day and age getting back to this text that is saying, no, you get to be transformed by the Spirit to see it, to see the world differently.
Yes, and I didn't read that part of the story where it lists all the places, but you see, Libya, Arabia, all these. So there were people of multiple races and multiple nationalities here present in Jerusalem. And, we always talk about our fear that the church is on the decline. We say the church is, growing less important in the culture and all these things, all these anxieties we have. Mm-hmm. But it's really only in the West that this is happening. And we don't look at Africa and South America and Latin America and all these places where the church is actually growing.
Yeah, I think what's happening in the church in America in some ways, Martin Marty, all of his writings as a historian on the church in the United States is really critical. And there are constant revivals taking place in our own, 250-year history, whatever it is. And you see these awakening periods, and you see in our own culture these theological movements that kind of come and go. I was reading an article recently about how much the theology of Norman Vincent Peale, who was popular probably a generation before me, who believed that the church should be teaching nothing but the be happy attitudes. And everything, think positive, and everything is going to go. And that's played itself out now in our culture. It's still around, growing with a change, and it's now called the prosperity gospel. And the church is always, if it goes back to the scriptures and this text, it has to constantly define itself, not just for a new era, but rediscover the essential biblical truth, not parts that you want to pull out to say this is what the church is, but these themes of justice and forgiveness and anti-imperialistic ways of thinking about I get to be God myself. Really, that's the story from Genesis, is this awareness there's a God and you're not it. And then the coming to grips with the fact God calls us, as you hear in Acts 2, to be the church of diversity. And really to lead with love rather than the human tendency to put yourself above others, but to live again in community. That's what I'm hearing in the Acts text today.
Yeah, I was thinking about that with everything that's happened in the last week, with the shooting, not the shooting, the murder of the black man in Minneapolis. His name George Floyd, I think. And all the protesting and rioting that happened yesterday. And I was home in the comfort of my house, and I could just put my phone away and just pretend that none of it was happening. And that, to me, was what felt comfortable, but the more I think about it, that is not what we as the church are meant to do.
No, there is clearly this prophetic history that we wanted to ignore. If you hear that story and it doesn't punch you in the gut, that a man is crying out, I can't breathe, and there's no awareness that this is a person of character and dignity and whatever his story is. If the church sees events like that and blinds itself over and says, well, not my concern, we've lost part of the clear biblical teachings, not just of Jesus, but of the whole history of the what we call the Old Testament, but the whole history of the Torah. A call for us to see ourselves as a part of a global world. If we view ourselves through the lens only of our own nationalism and then some ethics after that, this text doesn't transform us, and the church doesn't transform us in the way it did in this first century.
I think of that contemporary worship song we sing, is it Build Your Kingdom Here? With that line, set your church on fire. I think that's my prayer going into this Pentecost season, that God, through the power of the Spirit, would set us on fire. You know, I've been, in the past 10 weeks we've been online, I feel us just going down in energy, that we feel so blah, and that this is really hard to maintain. And I'm hoping that we can feel that Spirit's fire and energy and passion going into this next season.
Yeah, me too. And as the summer comes, I'm excited about a chance to get outside. And one of the things of this church, and most churches that I know, have some message about it. The church is about extending God's grace to all people. And I think it's that line is actually on our letterhead and in our mission statements. When we look at whether or not the church should be opening right now, one of the messages that are being told, yeah, you can come and worship, but if you're 65 and older, stay home. And I look at that and I say, yeah, extending God's grace to all, but we'll worship, but if you're at this age, don't come. That is not living out who we are. And so we will wait for that day again in which our people in this church who are in their 90s, and we have a couple who are in their 100, will be able to worship with those who are young, and there won't be fear, which is part of what this text is about. They think the people are drunk, right? That they're walking by and they're going to be, and Peter stands up and says, no. Let me give you a new vision of what this kingdom is about. All people are valued. All people have a voice. And this isn't a political ideology, whether it's conservative or liberal. This is the thrusting message of the church. God's kingdom has broken open into our world, and all who have traditionally been marginalized need to understand, in the grace of God, here is where you belong. And here is a place of healing and hope for all people.
That's it.
That's it.
That's all you need to know.
Did I make a reference to the quilts
Yes,
for
you
this
did.
Sunday? I did that
We're
already.
good.
Anything else you want to say about the church?
Well, we got to save something for next week, so.
Yeah, that'll be fun to, again, be outside with worship. So given all of that, thank you for being here. We'll see you this Sunday. Again, we'll probe the meaning of the church in this day and age and in our world. And until then, on behalf of Pastor Kristina Hill, I'm Gary Guptill, pastor here at Glen Cary Lutheran Church. Have yourself a fabulous weekend. See you on Sunday.